particular child that you're dealing with. Elementary school brought a whole other round of challenges. At one CSE meeting, the speech teacher happily announced Mel no longer needs her services. I should have been happy. I wasn't. I realized at that moment that that was the only service she was getting at the time, and the chair announced no speech, no IEP for Melanie. I said, we're going to have to do something about that. We could have her declassified, and at that moment, you know how a light goes on in your head? A light went on. The night before, one of my cousins talked about a 504 plan. Do you know what that is? It's a federal plan for children who learn differently. And so I threw it out. What did I have to lose? I had nothing else up my sleeve. I said, how about a 504 plan? Yeah, that'll work. The principal of the school will administrate it. She'll get all those things she needs. She'll get extra times for testing. She'll get her one-on-one. All the things that I had come to count on will be back in our, in our basket if we have a 504 plan. So that's what we did. And what I learned from that was to network and listen to anyone in a similar situation, and feel free to borrow heavily from anything they tell you. And that's what we did. We muddled through grades 1 to 4 with a terrific one-on-one aide, a school psychologist, and mainstream teachers. During that time, we came to understand that if we didn't laugh, we would cry. And we coined phrases like Melly meltdowns to explain the frequent meltdowns that she was experiencing at school and at home. By 4th grade, we started to see some mental health issues that qualified Melanie as a person with a dual diagnosis. We started taking her to a psychologist who turned out to be a very poor fit for our family. He admitted after seeing her for many months that he could not help her. As an aside, he also admitted to me a couple years later he kept no records. Big problem. He referred us to a psychiatrist, but I still had to find her another psychologist. In our area, there's a shortage of both. And I found a new one after this first doctor decided to teach Mel a lesson. He had her taken out of his office down a long, winding staircase on a stretcher by the police to our local mental hospital, and it was in the next town. I didn't even know where it was. So I followed the police. I said, you know where Ellis Hospital is? I said, no, I'm from Albany. I'm in Schenectady. It's the next town. I have no idea. But I followed the police. We went there. He told me we were going to teach Melanie a lesson. If she's going to say she's suicidal, we're going to take her right to the hospital. So what did Melanie learn from that? Well, they evaluated her. They fed her pizza. And a few hours later, she went home. And she learned that if you act out at the psychologist, you get fed pizza, and you're sent home many hours later. Okay. We found another psychologist who had a part-time practice. When I needed to talk to him, I left a message on an answering machine and prayed he'd call me back in a timely manner. There was also a psychiatrist at that time who told me that if I didn't hospitalize Melanie, as she wanted me to, she would call Child Protective Services and turn me in. And we left her practice that day because I felt that a member of my team, and we have a team, should not be threatening me instead of working with me. If she was truly trying to protect Melanie, she would have called CPS anyway, so she thought it was in her best interest. She never did. I will no longer hire a part-time psychologist or psychiatrist. And that's just from my own experience. Everybody can do what they need to do, but having a full-time person working with you when you have a child like this is very important. So don't give up, keep asking became my mantra. After one of Melanie's inpatient stays, the psychiatrist who treated her offered to see her at their hospital outpatient clinic, and I jumped at the chance. She was transferring there, she was taking on new patients. I have to mention it's 30 miles away, and in Albany, that's a big deal. We can get anywhere in 5 minutes in Albany. So a year later, she went back to Harvard to teach, and she paved the way for us to see the head psychiatrist when she left the practice. I had been trying to get into that practice for 6 years. I had asked. And finally I said, I've been trying for 6 years to get into that practice. And she just smiled and said, you didn't know me then. And we were in. That was it. So for the past 7 years, I've driven 50 miles round trip to see the best psychiatrist in the area. He has receptionists who take messages, and they make sure that he actually gets them, not an answering machine, and he works at a hospital that has inpatient and outpatient services. And here's what I tell my friends. I wouldn't trust my house sale to someone who dabbles in real estate. I don't trust my child to someone who's not available full-time when we have an issue. Finding a middle school, and you guys are so lucky to have a school like this, was very tough. Melanie had issues in our home district that involved bullying, and it left her feeling unsafe and anxious in our local middle school. We found an ally in our school psychologist. She understood we had to be out of there. Our school was 5, 6, 7, 8. 5 and 6 were very difficult years. And she was becoming more and more unstable. So I spent a ton of time in the vice principal's office. I was a good girl, there's nothing I did, but we spent a lot of time talking and brainstorming as to how we can help Melanie. And one thing I did to help her was to take a position on the PTA. I wound up vice president of the PTA. And what this did was it allowed the teachers to get to know me and the principals. And I'd always volunteered. This was nothing new. I'd volunteered for 40 years since I was a teenager. But by getting to know the principals and allowing them to get to know me, it helped them understand that Melanie came to them as a bright child on the autism spectrum with some mental health issues, and that she was not the child of permissive or negligent parents. A lot of times our parents take the blame for something that frankly they have no control of, especially those middle school years. We found a program for Melanie that led to our first introduction to what in New York is called BOCES, which is the Board of Cooperative Educational Services. I don't think you have that here, but what the need that it serves is if you have 2 children in a school that have the same educational needs, like they need the same emotional supports, and maybe a social worker, you can't possibly put together a class for 2 children. So what BOCES does is they will look at schools in maybe a 25, 30-mile radius and take those 2 kids from this school, those kids from this school, that one, and they put them all together in one classroom. And it actually is a good idea because then they can educate them properly. So if you have some very specific needs, BOCES will likely have a classroom in your area. So Melanie's first placement was a school called Chalmont, and it was, I want to say about 40-mile drive, something like that, 40-minute drive to Chalmont from our house, something like that.
That sounds about right.
And they told us that they had a program for her, which had a social worker, great, special ed teacher, small class size, and the opportunity for Melanie to attain mainstream classes. Wonderful, this is everything we wanted. On paper, it was a great fit. Unfortunately, anybody have a middle schooler here? Middle schoolers? It's a very tough time for children on the spectrum. Hormones are racing, and it's also a tough time for kids who have mental health issues. Melanie, of course, had both. And her first hospital stay was during that time. She was very unstable. On one field trip, she tried to throw herself off a mountain, and a male teacher restrained her. Another time, I got a call, come to the school, don't break any traffic rules, but you need to be here ASAP. As I approached the school, I saw an ambulance and a police car at the side door. And I am such a Pollyanna, I said, couldn't have anything to do with my Melanie. No way. Of course it did. As I got there, I found out that Melanie's teacher had gotten, kids on the spectrum do not like to have people in their space. Teacher had gotten into her space, and Melanie had punched her. Unfortunately, she had a pacemaker, which nobody knew. Melanie's aim was dead on. Hit the pacemaker, teacher went down, social worker was doing CPR, got her back, sent her to the emergency room, not Melanie, but the poor teacher. And Melanie was suspended from school. The school declined to press charges, but I did have a meeting with the police at the scene, and I can tell you that as a parent who's never had any interaction with the police in my entire life, it was a very scary situation. We had her hospitalized that same afternoon, I have to say. And most of her stays were 3 to 4 weeks long. The first time we did it with lots of trepidation. After that, you know what? It gets easy. And I'll tell you why. We viewed those stays as a break. Our family needed to regroup. After all, we had another child who needed a little peace and quiet. And she was in a safe place, and she was getting the help that she needed. I wound up attending support groups for parents whose children have been hospitalized. And what did I do there? I was problem solving for all of them. And it was not a great place for me because I was very positive about the whole thing, and everybody else was, oh my goodness, my child's in a hospital. no, your child's in a very safe place. They're getting therapy. But the other problem we had, and I did visit every day, I drove an hour up to the hospital and back, was that at the hospital, Mel attended school, and Monday nights was family therapy. And the staff quickly realized, as a dually diagnosed person, her issues being on the spectrum were very different from the other children who had simply mental health issues. And Melanie couldn't relate to them, and they couldn't relate to Melanie.
Well, there's something I'd like to add to that, if
Sure.
you don't mind.
Sure.
The other issue is that the majority of the children in these groups were abused by their parents and were in the foster care system. I had none of that. My parents were always perfectly fine to me. So I spent all these sessions being depressed and sorry for these kids instead of getting the help that it was supposed to be. And I could not relate to all these abused kids.
Yeah, Melanie felt so sorry for those children that, who were in the foster care system. They had no visitors either. I became like a group mom. A lot of them would come over and talk to me when I came up to visit because they had nobody. The doctors eventually excused her from the group, which is mandatory for every patient at the hospital. But what were they doing during that period? They were doing their paperwork. Now we have Melanie excused from the group with no supervision. What are we going to do? So they found a TV and a VCR. They told me, bring up popcorn and a movie, and you and Melanie will watch movies and eat popcorn while everybody else has their group therapy. And that's what we did. Melanie was never assigned a roommate after her first day because she needed a private room, not because we wanted it, but because, again, with the autism, they didn't understand the flapping and pacing and all that stuff any more than their parents did. So she always had a private room. And I'd been told to alert the doctors on that unit when she was coming because they wanted her there. They didn't want her being placed with older, tougher kids because children on the spectrum are developmentally delayed. And I will never forget, I always tell this story about one night when they heard she was coming, they started changing sheets in all the different rooms so they can move kids around so she could have the private room. And it took a lot of moves and who could stay with who until they finally got her there. I almost cried because it was such a kindness to her, and they really understood that if you're autistic, you're going to need some help with that kind of situation. When she was suspended and at home, she still needed schooling. So we had a teacher from our home district who came every day for months. I was a prisoner in the house at that time because there were very few people I could trust to supervise her. And I will tell you this about Melanie, this is kind of special. Over a 2-year period, she was hospitalized 6 times. She never repeated a grade despite being developmentally delayed, and was one of the youngest kids in her class. Her birthday's the end of November and the school is December enrollment. And she graduated at 17. Just so you know, so she lost tons of school and yet was able to graduate on time, if not early.
With a Regents diploma.
With a Regents diploma, which is a high-level diploma in New York. At that time, we got a case manager, and I was very thankful for her, and she actually freed me up. She said, you're managing her case, so I'll take her out to the movies or take her for ice cream, and I'll give you an hour a week that you can go out and get your grocery shopping done. And that, I was very, very grateful. Melanie at that time wanted to be normal. She wanted to make friends outside of our family, and so we found a one-of-a-kind social group for teens and young adults who are on the autism spectrum. And many of the participants were dually diagnosed with both autism spectrum disorders and mental health issue. And finding this group made Melanie feel she found her planet, or her tribe, or her people. So they had shared interests, they had the same challenges, they adored her, and she adored them. She went from being the oddball at school to the belle of the ball. She was even proposed to a couple of times.
More than a couple.
I found myself on the board, and I later became the acting president of this not-for-profit, and finally her social needs were being met. I just want to talk to you a little bit about finding a high school for her, and you'll see how lucky you guys really are. It presented more challenges than I ever could have imagined. What they do is they tell you to come look at a BOCES school, where they have one of these BOCES classrooms I was telling you about. And one had a really rigorous math and science program. And I jokingly called it the Harvard of BOCES programs. And I said, I'm not looking for Harvard. I just want a nice little program with Mel because Melanie did not like math and loved science, and the math would have been her undoing, so we kept looking. Then we went to the local psychiatric hospital. They had a high school program for kids who also needed therapy. To my utter shock and dismay, they refused to enroll her. They said she's too unstable for their program. So where do you take a bipolar autistic child when the psychiatrist at the local psychiatric hospital says, go look elsewhere? We got back in the car and we had to keep looking. There was another program that we investigated in an economically disadvantaged school district, which Melanie will tell you about. She spoke about it at dinner. And she spent 2 days there as a visitor. Let's just say not a good fit. Well, now it's the last day of school. We're at the last program available to us. It was an interdisciplinary school skills program, and we visited, as I said, on the last day of school. They were having a party when we arrived. If this didn't work out, there were no more days in the school year. There were no more schools to go look at. I was a little nervous, and I'm usually a cool cucumber, but this had me a little nervous. So we met Mr. Lockwood, who was her teacher, and the social worker, and he joked with her about joining the soccer team. Millie had no clue, but played right along with him. Sure, yeah, I'll join the soccer team. And it was in a district that was only 10 minutes from our house. And no child had ever graduated from this program, and it had been in existence for maybe, 10 years now?
Yeah.
No one had ever graduated with a Regents diploma, but we wanted her to be able to go to college. And to get into a good college, she would need to prove she could do that level of work. So the teacher said to me, look, I've never had anybody do it, but if she works hard, there is no reason why she can't get a Regents diploma. Anything is possible. So they said they would tailor a program to meet her educational needs, and she'd get counseling. And we finally found a program for Mel. Then my luck ran out. The following year, they moved the program to another school district. So poor Melanie had been in like 5 districts already, and we're moving. I said, what am I going to do with her? She didn't want to move. She had made friends in the mainstream classes and said, no, I don't want to transfer. Well, I found 3 options as I saw. This is how I kind of work things out. 1, we move. Let's take the family, buy a new house. It's only 10 minutes up the road. And we'll move to this district because they had a highly rated special education program in addition to this BOCES, just for kids in their district. They were not in the classes, but they had a very good program. She'd made friends. But what I didn't mention was that my sister lives 6 houses away with her children, and I had wonderful, wonderful neighbors, and we've been in the house for about 20 years. Not a great option. Okay, I have a cousin, single girl. She said, I will adopt Melanie, I will take guardianship of Melanie, and you can send her, and she lived in the district. Okay, but now I have no rights to my child. Anybody want to give up their children? I don't think so. No. Okay, didn't like that idea either. The third option was to convince Melanie to move. That seemed the more likely one. So what did I do? I went to her religious school teacher and said, give me a list of all the kids from that school district that Melanie knows. Give me a list. She came up with about 10. And then I talked to my cousin's child, who was also in that school, and she said she would take Melanie under her wing. She would introduce her to people. She's coming in now as a sophomore. As a sophomore. And so Melanie, when she realized how many kids she would know at that school, she was finally ready to make the move. And it was a great move. She thrived there. It was a beautiful district. This was the one that you paid the highest school taxes to live in. The principal welcomed her. When she won an award for community service, they announced it over their loudspeaker. They welcomed all these BOCES kids as if they were their own children in their own district. And what a wonderful thing. I get chills just thinking about it. It was a top-notch school. She earned her Regents diploma. Now here's the funny thing. My home district issued her diploma. Melanie never spent 1 minute in 1 day in 1 class in that district. But when she went to graduate, they were so kind, they found an envelope that was the same, the wrapper that your diploma comes in was the same as, they gave it to her from their district so that she wouldn't look any different than any of the kids that graduated with her. The first school that she had been to as a freshman told me that she could not participate in their graduation. But this school welcomed her with open arms, found a folder for her, and had her participate in their graduation. What sense would it be to go to the graduation from our home district? She didn't know anyone in the class. So that was wonderful. When Melanie, all through the years, wanted to nominate her teacher. She kept the same teacher for 4 years. She wanted to nominate him for they have our television station has a top 13 teachers award, and she wanted very badly to nominate him. I said, you can, but you have to wait till after you graduate, so he knows that there's nothing in it for you, you just want to do something nice for him. So when Melanie graduated, she nominated her teacher. He won. He was one of the first, he was the first ever BOCES teacher to get this award. They came out, they did a story about the teacher. Melanie was invited to come back and sit in the class. It was wonderful. And he invited his wife and Melanie to attend the ceremony. They gave him $500 and, you know, a few nice things. But it was just lovely. So what I want to say, what I want to end with is that we came to realize that Hillary Clinton was right, that it takes a village to raise a child. And we collaborated with the school psychologists, social workers, an intensive case manager, a psychiatrist, our private psychologist, her teachers, our pharmacist, he had a big role, a job coach, and many relatives with appropriate backgrounds. Mark and I, who's sitting over there, were the captains of the team, but I have to assure you that we had a large team with terrific input. And we are thankful to all of them as they helped us to raise Melanie. Today, I'll tell you what Melanie is up to. She's a happy, healthy, productive member of society. She attends college where she takes 3 courses per semester. That's what she can handle. She has an A average. As I told her all through high school, your classmates may not get you in high school, but in college they're going to find you fascinating. Just recently she told me I was right. Melanie has a terrific part-time job as a systems advocate for a not-for-profit called Youth Power. She advocates for other youngsters.
Well, you'll hear about it.
Well, she'll tell you about it. She advocates for people like herself and with all kinds of disabilities. When time permits, she travels around the country voicing her story and sharing what it feels to be like on the autism spectrum. And Mark and I have to credit Melanie with being open to treatment and being caring and bright, and these traits have brought her a lot of success. And I look forward to seeing where she's going to end up. So I want to thank you for hearing our story, and I want to introduce you to my daughter, Melanie. I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions when Melanie's done speaking, sure. So I'll sit down and let you hear the main event. I will never speak after her.
Ever since I was old enough to think for myself, I always knew that there was something up with me. I knew both knowledgeably and instinctively that I was different from the other kids. In my preschool, in my early elementary school, but I never really knew exactly what it was until I was maybe 6 or 7 years old, when my parents finally told me Asperger's syndrome. And my first response to this, well, Asperger's syndrome, what's that? Then when it's explained to me, I have an epiphany. Oh, so this is why I'm different. But as I'm going to be telling you over and over and over again through my talk, different is not bad. Everybody say it with me. Different is not bad. Good. You'll hear that a lot. So I went through early elementary school having these insane interests, which is one of the hallmarks of the disorder, as you all well know. I mean, your parents. I'm sure your kids all have their insane interests. Me, I loved science. I loved insects. I even loved taxonomy, if anybody knows here what that is, which is the classification of living things. And my parents and my teachers, they encouraged that so much. My parents would take me to museums and zoos, and my teachers would give me all these different science books and always have me answer questions in class when nobody else could, because they knew I always had the answer. But the other kids in elementary school, they didn't always really understand. And I suppose at an age that young, it's kind of hard to explain to a child why somebody in their class is so different. And that wasn't my only difference. Oh my God, this one story. You see, some of the people in my classes were annoyed with me missing social cues and taking things literally, there was one Saturday morning where my mom wakes me up saying, "Melanie, there's a donut with your name on it." So I walk down the stairs, I get the bag of donuts, and I pick each one up, and I'm looking at them like this, and I say to my mom, "Where's the one with my name on it?" That did not go over well with my classmates when that came up in school, I will tell you that much. Nor did it go over well when my sensory issues started to bug me. My classmates would wonder why I had such a problem with somebody coming in with perfume. They didn't realize a lot of the time that when I walk into a room with a strong fragrance, it feels like it stings my insides. But how could I explain that to my neurotypical classmates? At that age, I really couldn't. Not to mention the fact that they wanted to know why I was always walking around with my socks inside out. Back then, there were two kinds of teachers in my mind. There were the teachers that got me and the teachers that didn't. And I'll give you an example of each. Now, my third grade main classroom teacher, Mr. Marone, was always just so excellent with me. He would let me take tests separate from the other students if I was getting distracted. He was really tall and intimidating looking when I first met him. But, on day one, he came down to my level like this.
Got down on his knees.
Yes. That convinced my parents that this was a good elementary teacher for me, and I always was very thankful for him. In fact, he later became the vice principal of the high school, though he always told me that he preferred the little ones. But, not all teachers are going to be like that. In the fourth grade, and in my district, fourth grade was the last year of elementary school, I had this gardening teacher, this gardening program. What happened was, when we were digging through the plots to start our garden, she told us to look for roots and dig them out. Keep in mind that people on the spectrum can take things literally. When it came time to actually plant the flowers, I said, "Oh, roots." And then she starts scolding me. "Well, don't you understand that they need the roots?" And I was just baffled. It was in elementary school where both my parents started recognizing my needs, and I started to recognize some of my needs on my own, too. Then came middle school. Geez. In middle school, the strange, quirky characteristics that I had in elementary school started to intensify. You see, I'm one of the rare cases of a girl having classic, by-the-book Asperger's. A lot of the time, girls with the disorder have more like a variation on the typical symptoms. Not me. So, a lot of the time, my classmates would get in my face about being different. Because in middle school, everybody is all cliquey and you want to fit in, and everybody that's different is weird.
Voices. Tell the story about the voices.
That comes in high school.
Let her.
And yes, they would get in my face about it. Yes, they would bully me about it. And, I was baffled by their bullying me, and I never really quite understood what I was doing that set them off so much. That's a big thing of being on the spectrum. You don't know what it is you're doing that is setting others off. Well, eventually, it was decided that this middle school was just not right for me. I had challenges that this school wasn't meeting. Now, this is also when my mental health started to pop up. And my mom talked about my hospital stays. And one thing about the dual diagnosis thing, you've got to understand whether the child is dually diagnosed or not. Everybody on the spectrum, anybody with any disorder at all, is different. Everyone's different, and different is not bad. But different also means that you can't use blanket rules. Like, there was this one rule when I was in the little kid unit at the hospital that we were not allowed to have water before bed. Keep in mind that they had me on a high dose of lithium. They didn't allow kids to have water before bed because there were kids on the unit that were bedwetters. But I never had that problem in my life, and they still imposed that rule on me. That's why I think that there should never be blanket rules when it comes to young people with disabilities. And I spent a lot of middle school in and out of the hospital, still really trying to find myself. And I think when I found myself was at my bat mitzvah. Now, because of my issues, we had to have my bat mitzvah a bit differently from the other students in my Hebrew school class. You know, we had to have a band instead of a noisy DJ. We didn't invite the whole class, which was a requirement, just the ones I was comfortable with. And at my bat mitzvah, I was given to read the portion of the Torah called Bamidbar. Bamidbar is about the Jews wandering in the desert and then finally finding the Holy Land. And in my speech that day, I talked about how I was wandering in the desert with my mental health issues and my Asperger's. And my being able to overcome my challenges to have my bat mitzvah was my finding the Holy Land. And that really touched a lot of people. You know, in middle school is just such a tough time for students on the spectrum. Am I right?
Yes.
But, you know, around high school, things really, really started to improve, actually. Now, of course, there was the finding of the high school. I went along with my mom to all these different places, and I was just as nervous as she was because I didn't understand why I had to leave my middle school classroom that I had already been so comfortable in. But the high school program wasn't right for me, as my mom kept on saying. So we went to this one program I spent a couple of days at. It was called Rebound. Now that sounds like a nice, cozy title, doesn't it? Well, I spent a couple days there. The first day, you know, it seemed pretty okay. I mean, there were 3 teachers. There was a English, a math, science, and a social studies. Seemed pretty nice until day 2 rolled around. I was talking to the science teacher that day, and there were these 2 students on her computer that she would periodically start yelling at. It turned out they were watching A, porn, and B, Holocaust jokes.
This is true.
Yeah.
This is 100% true.
Yeah.
Then came English class, which was even worse. You see, this school, unlike the others, actually wanted me. They wanted me because they had a shortage of girls. So here I was the only girl sitting in this room, and these boys, instead of talking about English, decided that they wanted to brag about their genitalia size, followed by discussing what bra sizes they liked. When I tell the teacher that I am uncomfortable, he says, "Well, we're all adults here." And I say, "No, you're an adult, I'm 12.
We never went back, did we?
Never went back. But when we finally got to Mr. Lockwood's class, I had spent a whole lifetime of people not understanding me. A whole lifetime of wondering why people had to be so mean and nasty to me for something that I couldn't help. But I went into Mr. Lockwood's class, and I sit down with him, and he understands me right away. It was just amazing. And I had found my program that I really had. So I settled into this high school. I had other people with same issues in classes with me. The other bipolar child in the class would go to all my classes with me, and we would study together. And I really found a niche there. The people there, it wasn't like middle school. While there was some bullying, really not so much. Though there was one incident, a couple of incidents that made me feel kind of uneasy at that school. Now, as I mentioned, I have bipolar disorder. And this bipolar disorder causes me to have mood swings, but it can also cause hallucinations. And I had a rule of thumb for when I'm hallucinating. If it doesn't make sense, it's not there. So one day I'm sitting in my English class, and I hear my name in a faint whisper. And, I'm thinking, well, this is something I usually hallucinate. It's probably not real. I'm going to go back to my readings. But it kept on happening over and over again, day after day. And it's kind of embarrassing, the reason why I was hearing this.
Tell them why.
Apparently, and this has gotten really common since then. What?
No.
Well, you know what I'm about to say.
Yeah, I know what you're about to say. Go ahead.
Apparently, the boy in the class had a crush on me, and that is why he was saying my name under his breath.
I had to ask the teachers to check on this. Coming home and hearing someone. They heard it too.
Now, even though I was transitioning into this, eventually, change, the winds of change and all that, I had to be transferred to another high school. But this high school, was pretty nice too. And around that time, I started working with my school-to-work transition counselor. Now, my school-to-work transition counselor, this is a really great thing. We started out with me getting work experience by volunteering in an assisted living. And this is something I encourage all students on the spectrum to be doing, because it's a self-esteem booster, and because you get work experience, it's because you make a difference in the world, and just the feeling of helping somebody through community service is something that everyone on the spectrum needs to have experience with. So for years, every week, I would go to this assisted living, and I would visit with the residents, and I would play games with them. I led trivia, hangman, word games, and they loved it. It wasn't even the games so much as the fact as, this 15-year-old coming in to see them was such a novelty for them. And some of these people, their families had just dumped them there. And so I thought, well, maybe for one day a week, I could be their family. And I did so well in this volunteer position that my school-to-work transition counselor, Deb Hollner, nominated me for the Lieutenant John Finn Community Service Award. Well, she nominated me for the award, citing my work at the assisted living and all the other stuff I had done through the Jewish Federation chaplaincy program, through a cat clinic I volunteered at a couple of times, and what do you know, I wind up getting the award.
Tell him who John Finn was.
What?
Tell him who John Finn was and about his family.
Yes, John Finn was a police lieutenant that died in the line of duty, and his family set up this award for youth in Albany County in his memory. In fact, his daughter gave me a hug as I accepted his award, which I had to make a conscious effort not to duck away from, because that's my innate response to somebody trying to touch me. You guys all know what I'm talking about. And sure enough, as my mom mentioned earlier, Mr. Lockwood one day decides to put it on the intercom. And I was absolutely shocked. But this gets me into some of the coping strategies that I use in high school and in the outside world. My biggest coping strategy in high school was to join a club. I joined a club called the Environmental Club. And the Environmental Club allowed me to do a few things. First of all, it allowed me to prove myself, prove my worth to my classmates through the hard work I did in that club, serving as the assistant treasurer. It also allowed me to have people to sit with at lunch. It allowed me to have like an in crowd to be in. I knew people, they knew me, they trusted me, they respected me. And we had a club meeting the day that my award was announced on the intercom. And the president-elect of the club tells everybody to give me a round of applause. And I had never felt so special before. Especially since I had felt kind of self-conscious in high school because I wasn't taking a full AP course load and in the Honor Society. It really threw me for a loop, and I was really depressed about the fact that I wasn't taking an AP course load and in the Honor Society. But later in life I realized something. I was equal to my friends who were in those AP classes. I was just a late bloomer. All of my successes came in college and later. So I don't need to feel self-conscious about having not gone through that in high school, because I've accomplished so much in college and in the workforce. I eventually graduated from high school, as my mom said, with a Regents diploma, which was a rarity for a student with a disability. But it was a sign to me that, students with disabilities, don't ever doubt somebody with a disability. A person with a disability can accomplish whatever they want. I accomplished what I wanted. Your children can accomplish what they want too. But wait, I'm not done. And I haven't even started on college yet.
How much time?
Yeah,
You can call
let's go out at 11 now.
Okay. Okay, I'll do college and job quickly. So, I adjusted very well to college. One tip I have is to take a lighter course load at first, because that can get you really used to the college experience. I also really recommend community colleges. And your children should not be afraid to seek out services in college, because you can tell them that if you're afraid of students finding out about it, your accommodations are a private matter between your disability office and your professors. Nobody needs to know. And professors are usually more than accommodating of whatever you need. I know that my professors are. All my professors at my community college are great. And then, of course, there's my job. I work as the system advocate for Youth Power. Youth Power is the statewide network of young people who have been labeled and are seeking change. So we're an advocacy group for students with young people with disabilities, and also an experience with systems like mental health or foster care or juvenile justice. I make sure that young people's voices are heard throughout these state systems. I sit on committees, I write letters and phone calls to important people, I write what we call action alerts, I do policy work, I lead the policy work group of the organization, and doing community service and getting this job were my two biggest self-esteem boosters. And people on the spectrum should not be afraid to seek out part-time employment because it can be such a confidence booster. I know that my job is giving me tons of confidence, being able to help others. But even a job as a bagger can do that for somebody on the spectrum. So you've heard about my life, and I thank you so much for listening.
Let's see if there are any questions that for either Phyllis or Melanie. I want to ask Melanie if she would, I better give the microphone back, if you would say a little bit more about how you were able to have the confidence. Some of our parents out here have older kids, 16, 17, 18, and I think, and I don't want to put words in anybody's mouths, especially the parents, but I think their kids would think they're not confident in themselves. And at 16 and 17, it was starting to come together for you, I think you said.
Yeah.
So could you share just what was it that was coming together? Why was it starting to click? Is there any tricks that you could share with the families here that might help? Let me give you the mic.
Shy.
No, I love it.
I suppose that my biggest trick, well, I have a couple of tricks. My biggest tricks involve me overcoming the more stingy aspects of it, the more negative aspects of the disorder. Like, here's some examples. When I get overstimulated, one thing I do is carry a piece of candy with me. And if I start to feel overstimulated, I pop the candy in my mouth and it feels better. In fact, there was one time at work where my paratransit bus left without me, and my boss heard me screaming, "Wait, wait, wait," and thought I had gotten hurt, so she had rushed down to come help me, and she saw what happened and gave me a piece of candy. You see, it helps if the people around your child know their coping strategies so that they know to employ them if need be. There's also the stepping out strategy if they get overstimulated. If there's a loud party, wedding, bat mitzvah, etc., I just step out for a couple minutes, regain myself, and then go back in.
Okay. I have another question.
Yeah?
Well, can I use the mic or? Okay, we'll share. So this is really for both Melanie and her parents. What are the cues that you might use as parents that help Melanie understand that, hey, Mel, maybe you need to step out?